Yeah. amended the ordinance to allow for some growth in that area. So we're not actively processing an exemption request, but we thought, particularly Councilor Souther and I, that there was enough meat with the memo that you put together that some of these things may require additional effort, work, deliberation to incorporate into our ordinances. So we wanted to get you guys together to better understand the thought process behind it, and hopefully understand through this conversation how we might direct some of the efforts, future efforts, to see that some of these things are addressed and incorporated. You want to add anything, Councilor Sutton?
No, thank you, John. That was really well queued up. The only thing I would add is just, to give everyone the frame of reference. We did receive this the first week of September from the two committees. And, when we decided as a council to pivot and explore and have discussion about amending the GMO rather than entertaining the exemption request process, the piece that got, and I've said this before, but the piece that got left out was this public benefit piece. And, a bunch of my committees had been working to help us define that as a council. And so I think that it's really valuable to continue the momentum on that discussion. So I really appreciate the council taking the time to have this discussion now, so that it's still fresh in everyone's mind, because the work has been recently done.
So with that, we do have a few members of Conservation Commission or Sustainability. Conservation. Okay, so we have a member of the Conservation Commission and a member of Sustainability. So you're representing your respective committees. Would you mind just introducing yourself and give us your name?
I'm Chuck Spanger, Scarborough. I live on Beach Ridge Road, and Conservation Commission for 7 years, something like that. Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming.
David Kirstein, I not represent, but I'm here because as a member of the Sustainability Committee. I've been a member of the committee since it was the Energy Committee, and we've taken on a few other things, and I just appreciate the opportunity to learn and support some of the more forward-thinking things we're considering.
Well, welcome, both of you. So we don't have a set agenda for the workshop. I imagine it's going to wind up being a discussion amongst counselors and yourself. Do you want to try to introduce, kind of help bring the public up to speed with some of the key points of the memo and the genesis of it, and maybe some of the deliberations that you had?
Well, the sustainability has been concerned most recently with electric vehicle charging, and many of us drive a chargeable vehicle, and we're pretty familiar with the technology, and we've had substantial discussions about what improvements could be made to facilitate electric vehicle use. This conversation started probably a couple years ago with the realization that electric vehicle charging was coming to the public, and that it seemed interesting or logical to us that when construction sites are open or when a house is being wired, the best opportunity to look for ways to implement these new technologies is at the beginning. So I think we have been perhaps more aggressive in some people's eyes than they are ready to be, but we've had several revisions, as you know, of our suggested recommendations, and they're thoughtful, and they seem to have elicited feedback, and we've been able to modify them to make them forward thinking, but also not too intrusive. So I think I feel quite strongly about it, and I don't actually speak for the committee, but I really enjoy working with the committee, and I think we all think alike on that issue.
If I'm not mistaken, we have a draft ordinance working its way through the process as well for electric vehicle charging stations that I think is almost ready to go to ordinance committee.
I think, yeah.
I'm looking at you, Don, as well.
Yeah, it's at ordinance, it's been through one for two. The big question we had was trying to get input from people that are closest to it, and developers, so that's one thing.
Kind of along those lines, and talking to John Anderson earlier in the week, we don't offer many incentive. A lot of the way we're approaching this has been kind of punitive, right? You can't do it unless this. But what if we put a stick or a carrot out there and said, hey, you know what? We'll let you build 5% more units if they meet these standards. That may be a way to get buy-in from the development community, but also to encourage it to actually happen. Sorry, April.
No, not at all. The one thing I was going to add to the ordinance conversation was the ordinance is commercial property focused. And so one of the things, that we need to kind of reframe our thinking is around whether or not we want to apply some of those same standards to residential building. Because I know that was, with so many of the units going into the downs being, the buzz around town being all these residential units, and that's a trickier problem to decipher because the apartment buildings have designated parking spaces, and it's difficult to designate some of them as EV spaces. If the renter that rents that unit doesn't have an EV, then what do we do? And so they've had that conversation at sustainability. So that's definitely something, the ordinance, if I'm not mistaken, is more focused on commercial development.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Councilor Katarina.
It's the ghost in back of you. I apologize for not being there, but I'm getting over really bad bronchitis and I didn't think any of you wanted to share that. So
Appreciate that.
If I'm recalling, and I don't have this new ordinance in front of us, but I do think there's a provision for new construction of residential.
Okay.
To have a certain level of voltage or electric, and I'm looking at Rick Meinking, who's here. Am I right, Rick?
Rick's in the car, but Deb just walked in too. So,
well, Rick's online.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, super. I am just finished driving through Portland, so I'm like 5 minutes away, and I look forward to having this conversation. And I know you're talking about the EV ordinance, but if it's okay with the council chair, could we just go back and kind of do a little foundation here? Because I think we start to go down a road and we spend more time than trying to look at this from a conceptual, what we were hoping to gain out of our memo. And I'm happy to speak about it from the sustainability committee side. And then I know there's some conservation folks too, because it was really a two-part memo. And I'm just worried that we're going to go down the rabbit hole of worrying about this EV ordinance, which is, going to be in front of the ordinance committee. I think if it's not, it's going to be this week or next week.
Next week.
It's on the agenda.
Next week.
Yeah. So I'm just wondering if
I think that would be great, Rick.
And that's great. Well, I guess we rooted this memo based on the fact that the GMO was or the Downs was looking for a waiver on the GMO, and I'm not going to go over the history of that. You discussed that quite elegantly already, Mr. Chair. But rather now that you've granted the amendment, we feel like we've lost the ability to, I guess for lack of a better word, barter back and forth with the opportunities to do something because of this more accelerated growth now. I think that's our concern, is with this acceleration, the Downs are doing a great job, and I applaud them for the growth that they're doing and for bringing in these businesses and these residential into Scarborough. But it is going faster than what everybody had anticipated. And
So
that's
Rick,
good too.
I'm just going to stop you there because I feel like there's a bit of a false premise that's been circulating around that. That what
Right.
we allowed, what we amended the ordinance is exactly what was anticipated in both our comprehensive plan when we formed the downtown omnibus tax district. It's 100 units a year, 2,000 over 20 years. That's what we're allowing them to do. When we revised the ordinance, we cut them off. We said, no, we're not going to allow what we said we would because we want to get some ducks in order first. So
Oh,
I just.
I see. So my misunderstanding that the waiver then just, or the waiver was off the table and the amendment gave them the ability to do, you know, what
For 3 years.
exactly they wanted to do.
For 3 years, exactly what we said.
Okay.
When we signed the CEA
Well,
and,
then
yeah.
I did not educate myself on that aspect of it. And that's great, but I still think the point is we would like to see the Downs become poster child for what the future brings to the built environment, to the sustainability of the environment, to the resiliency of the environment, and kind of do no harm, so to speak. And so I think it's still relevant that we look at these options that we provided in the memo as maybe a starting point to allow us the time to get our ordinances up to snuff based on the comprehensive plan. If anything, I think the Sustainability Committee has learned that you can't get an ordinance changed in 3 months, 6 months, and sometimes you can change in a year. And so we're now faced with the likelihood of prolonged or not having our ordinances in line with the comprehensive plan. And so this memo was meant to kind of help with that gap.
Rick,
Does that make sense?
Rick, it's Jean Marie, not to cut you off, but you didn't answer my question.
I'm
Jimmy,
sorry,
why don't you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question is the proposed ordinance that we're taking up next week. Am I correct in that it's one of the things is requiring that new residential construction have the wiring or voltage or whatever ability to add EVs?
Yes, that's
Okay.
true. It's in the residential too,
Yeah.
to
Okay.
have them EV ready.
Okay, so that could apply to future construction in the Downs.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I don't know. I think I'm at a point where I've spoken enough, and I just wanted to see if that resonated with you, Mr. Chair. Now that I understand that the growth is a little slower than what the waiver would have done, but we still have this gap between the comprehensive plan and our ordinances that we need to work on.
I fully agree. And that's why we're here. I think the mechanism that we were trying to force this through may not have been the right one, but we have plenty of other mechanisms that we can use to try to affect some of these changes. And that's why we want to understand them better.
Yeah.
Councilor Anderson.
Yeah, I mean, my question for the group, having read the memo, with the 4 suggestions you had, seemed like really good suggestions for consideration for helping develop more sustainable development. I'm just curious, we can talk about each of these, but I'm just curious, were there things that, because you were focusing more on the Downs and the exemption, that there are other things that you think are important that we consider too, that weren't in the memo, that may also be other ideas that we may want to explore on? Is it an ordinance change? Is it something else we want to do? Because again, I worry because of the context of this, it might have been limited and you guys might have other ideas that we should be thinking about. I think in talking with, forget who it was, it might have been you, John, or someone else, where, one idea I've heard sometimes about development is, rather than just doing contiguous conserved land within the development that they're building in, would we, or I think it's already in our ordinances that there's an ability for them to, offer other land, or that they're going to purchase other land that's not part of their property and give that back to the town. But maybe our ordinances today aren't properly built to incentivize that type of behavior, where, we would want to think through a little bit more, how do we update our ordinance to ensure we're incentivizing them a little bit more to either buy other land that's not part of it, but is maybe contiguous to other conserved land, that is out there. So again, I'm just curious, are there other ideas that you guys have that weren't included in the memo?
Well, not so much that. I just want to shift a little bit and to say that while this memo was precipitated by the Downs project, this was an effort to get out in front of future requests for waivers for more rapid development. I know that there are things maybe in ordinance about like what they need to do for the public good. And our concern has been that some of the items for the public good may not rise to the level that we would find useful or acceptable or a reasonable trade-off. And so we're trying to get a set of ideas out in front of the council that could be used at those points. So you're not like, we've got this request, we need to respond to it in 6 weeks. Does anybody have any ideas? But to put a set of ideas that were targeted towards conservation and sustainability in that space. The other piece is, I'm going to try not to scream because it's been almost a decade. And each time we come forward with a suggestion about an ordinance, we're told we can't put that kind of thing in ordinance, that needs to happen in these kinds of conservation of TIFs and this and that and waivers and stuff like that. And when we come with a waiver, we're told that no, that needs to be put into an ordinance. We can't do it in this context because it has to be an ordinance. And so it's really been 10 years of pushing on these sorts of things in an effort to find ways to get the town to ask developers to do more and to do better. And so we're making some progress now with this one ordinance on electric vehicles. I hope we're making progress. We'll find out in the next weeks and months as it moves through the process. So we always have more ideas. We had settled on these 4 ideas as sort of the top level ideas that really aren't restricted to this one project.
Okay.
And so this is our thinking was, I mean, the purpose of slowing things down was to get some of the ordinances out in front. We didn't have time to get the ordinances out in front, and now the adjustment has already been made. And so this building is now occurring without any of these adjustments that we were hoping to catch. So we keep trying. We'll
And I
keep at
think
it.
it's good that you did. So, John, I think you were referring to the transfer in lieu development rights, which is actually a program that's maintained by the Conservation Commission, and we made some adjustments somewhat recently, I think, at your request. The fact is, nobody's taken advantage of it. I don't think there's been a single one, because we have a similar program that you can get a density bonus for providing affordable housing or paying into a fund for affordable housing. But I think the concept is still worth digging a little deeper into. And you mentioned it in your memo, we want to conserve more land as we grow out, right? That doesn't necessarily mean we want to conserve the land where we're trying to direct our growth, although some of it should be, but really it's the rest of Scarborough that we want to take big steps in making conservation efforts there.
And it's 2 pieces on that as well, because I can't remember if this got into the memo, but we had long conversations about equity issues in terms of the conversation and the importance of conserving land where people actually live and where people actually are going to live. And so sometimes, yes, it would make absolute sense to preserve something else because it's higher value. Other times it's going to make more sense to preserve land, especially if we can do contiguous conservation, to provide wildlife corridors, to provide larger ecological spaces. When we chop it up and do this bit and that bit and something else, it doesn't serve the ecological services that it can serve when it's in larger pieces.
Go ahead.
Can I ask a question about, I hope I pronounce this right. Is it Passive House? Is that how you say it? Passive House? So I was trying to Google, because I've heard a lot about LEED buildings. And so this was the first time I heard about Passive House. What's the difference between the two, and why are we guys proposing this versus LEED? And should we also be thinking about LEED building measurements and enforcing or encouraging that type of development as well?
Great question. And the comprehensive plan did address that the built environment it would be desirable to have the built environment pursue the different building certifications like LEED and Passive House. What the Sustainability Committee did on the Passive House was, it's a little bit easier to build to Passive House than to go and do all the lead stuff. Now, the lead does do a whole lot more. I mean, it requires bicycle and some of the stuff is already done. It deals with landscaping and things. But I think what we were focused on was more of the energy aspects of what the built environment does. And so the passive house has a nice pathway. And it's recognized, but we did make the caveat that we felt going to passive house was one thing. Getting it certified is quite different, and it can get costly. And so we were just trying to get the standards raised to build to those standards instead, and not have to go through the actual certification. But we felt good knowing that it could have, and they still could pursue it if the owner wanted to spend that money and get the sticker, so to speak.
So it's just a separate set of criteria. And there are different people with different views of each of these criteria, but many of the criteria on the LEED certification don't feel meaningful to some of us. And that there are ways to spend money and check boxes in ways that don't necessarily improve the sustainability or the way in which that building is going to function. And so our preference within the group was for this context. So that was really more specifically towards single family home and multifamily home development.
Do you think you could come up with a set of standards that somebody could evaluate whether a particular project was successful in meeting?
Well,
A
there's
lot of the
test
passive
house.
house people do that. There's a list. It has a list.
Okay, but I thought I heard Rick saying, don't go for the certification, but pick the pieces that make sense.
You don't have to spend the money to get that piece of paper that says it is.
Okay, still
But
follow.
if you want to, you could. But we didn't want to put that extra burden on anybody saying that you have to go and you have to pay that extra money to get that certification. We just felt like building to that standard would give you the best benefit and save you money from having to get the sticker.
Just one question though, and that would be though, does getting the certification for whoever builds it, does it actually help them? Can they offer it for more of a cost because they have that certification? And same thing from a valuation perspective. If something was passive house certified, does that somehow factor into its valuation where we would value it higher? That's where I'm
Well, the
just
banks are
curious.
starting to recognize that for sure when they're
Yeah.
looking at doing loans and stuff like that. Absolutely. And you know, green brokers, as they call them, like Katerina may, or I'm sorry, Jean Marie.
I was gonna say, wrong name.
Would have a little bit more information on the green marketing for real estate, but certainly it's becoming recognized that these are more valuable because of the lower.
And the
Energy.
issue, not to poo-poo anything, because as you all, or most of you know, I have solar panels and I've done everything I should be doing and whatnot. But yes, passive houses would sell. It does add value for the person who's selling the house, but it costs money to do them up front. So the trade-off is affordability. And I don't mean affordability from the HUD, the HUD description of affordability or definition, but affordability from a general point of view. And so if we could think of some elements that we would like to see included, but again, as Mr. Clucci pointed out at the beginning, you can take a carrot and you can take a stick, and sticks don't work real well. I wish there was more money out there to incentivize. I see this as being a higher level potential issue, i.e. the state. But I'd certainly, we want to keep thinking and talking about this. But I know personally, frankly, I could not support saying you have to build as a developer to passive house standards, because it would just make us even more expensive in Scarborough, and we're one of the most expensive places to buy a house now. So
And again, we're not proposing this as an ordinance. The codes are the state codes, and that's absolutely the case. Many of us are frustrated with the state codes. I mean, you're talking about maybe a 3% extra cost to save thousands of dollars. Like, the trade-off is so obvious. And if we could just get builders to describe it as an option, we would be so much further along than we are. But again, we're not asking that this be a code. We're not in that. That's not what this document is about. This is simply one of the things that you could choose to say to a developer that was asking for a waiver. If you'd like to build this more densely, you can, if you also do this, or you.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is absolutely necessary because, you know, the builder at the Downs did not offer to do anything like that and don't even know if they know how. And that's the case with most builders. You know, they don't jump on new technologies. They jump on the ones they're making money on. And so, yeah, that.
And so we had at one point talked about perhaps requiring builders in town to have a form that listed options that had to be presented. And the pushback there was so little of the building is done with a buyer in mind, that most of this building is done spec with the buyers unknown. And that's just a strange place for us all to be in.
It's what's been interesting in my neighborhood because it's a newer development on Layton's farm. You know, originally when they were developing the specs, I think they were making choices that were limiting, but I think now they're seeing more homes are asking for things like being EV ready or having the EV technology. And so I think now they are trying to build more of that into their base models, whereas before maybe there wasn't demand or people weren't asking for it. So I do think the market, at least in my neighborhood, like there's a lot more electric vehicles I'm seeing there now than there were in the first phase of the development. But just on this passive house thing, I think what would be really helpful as maybe a next step is like really understanding within that criteria, like what would you guys prioritize as like the most beneficial? Because again, while I agree with Jean Marie to some extent, I think in some places, yes, we should maybe offer an incentive and a carrot. In some places, I feel like if we want to be a community known for sustainable development, if that's what we aspire to as a community, then maybe there are some things that we need to make more clearly as part of our ordinances. And maybe it's not the biggest benefit, but if there are things we can do to start to make progress in that direction where we do incorporate it, I'd like to know what are those, maybe from a developer's perspective, the you know, low effort, moderate impact type things that they can do so that we can at least start moving in that direction and not like require it for every single new development.
For code, I think we're really very limited.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that Maine uses a universal building code. There's now an option for a stretch code, but I think it's like one option, it's this or that. Is that the case?
Yeah.
So we can't take those little steps. I would love for somebody to prove me wrong on this. People have been arguing that I can't do this for a very, very long time. We're in that catch-22. The builders won't build it because people aren't asking for it. The people aren't asking for it because they've never heard of it. The people aren't paying attention to the information about what is available, and it's been very difficult to get the builders' attention either. So if anybody has great ideas as to where to interrupt that loop, like we've been pushing on the edges of it for a decade, and we don't know where the gaps are to start prying that thing open. This feels like it might be one if and when there are other requests for waivers.
So
Well, Efficiency Maine, to tout that, Rick, Efficiency Maine's made some great inroads as far as solar and heat pump and insulation.
Yeah, I think some of this was driven because we do have, you know, Scarborough's part of the state of Maine, and state of Maine has laws and they have goals. And one of them is, you know, the greenhouse gas reductions. And not only that, but the RPS, the renewable portfolio standards that put more clean energy onto the grid. Yeah, there is, it's tough because I work for Efficiency Maine, and I don't want this to sound like it's coming from them or from that organization, but there is funding and information that are accessible to contractors. that can help with this and start to move the needle. And with the federal funds coming in, there's even more. And so we're at a great opportunity now to say, okay, let's improve. We have goals. We know how to do it. We shouldn't be putting in any combustion equipment in homes. Why do you want a fire in your house? You spend a lot of money on insurance and everything like that, and then you have a fire going on in your house all the time. Doesn't make a lot of sense. Technology's changed. We can go all electric. And as our renewable portfolio standards go up, more clean energy on, we're putting more load on that clean energy grid, and the environment is going to benefit from that.
Well, that's why I brought up Efficiency Maine, because you do offer those rebates and this financial incentives. I've seen a real sea change over the last, I'm going to say 5 years anyway.
It's a shame we're spending all this money fixing buildings. That's
Right.
what we're doing. We're
Yes.
fixing buildings,
Yeah.
and we're not helping the new buildings any.
Well, right,
any better. We're
right.
gonna come back and fix them.
Well, that's why I say some of this conversation I'd like to see higher, at a higher level, but.
And we're all trying.
So just from my perspective of the implementation of something like this policy, if you really want it to be effective, I don't see how you get around it not being an ordinance. And I say that because Rick, Karen will tell you at a planning board level, when a development comes in, and the developments we're talking about are, up to a dozen houses, up to maybe even 100. That's what you're really after here, is getting those types of new developments that come in improved as far as the energy efficiency and all that. You can make a suggestion to a developer and say, we'd love to see you put a solar panel field. We'd love to see you do this, that, and the other thing. But if it's not in our ordinances, there's nothing that planning board can really force upon a developer. So I think you're back to the point of, if you really want to see these changes, there has to be something codified that needs to be followed. That's from a practical application from where I sit. That's how I would view this.
Let me throw
Right,
an idea
but-
out there real quick. Yeah, so let's say that it still needs to go in your ordinance, but let's say if you build to passive house standards, yeah, you can have a seat, please. That building doesn't count towards the GMO. Okay, all right, so you got a 60-unit building in the center of our downtown, you want to build it to passive house standards, maybe that's electrified, doesn't count against the GMO. Go ahead.
You're killing me, Mr. Chair.
Now you know
Dying
why.
inside.
You can make
No,
commitments.
yeah, so because I'm not sure the solution to reducing energy is to put more units that absorb or create more energy usage. But how about tax dollars? Because the dollar is what talks. So if there's a trade-off, which is they can get credits towards these energy efficient towards a tax bill or whatever their permit fees might be. Something rather than a couple extra units in my world, because you're just adding to more people, more population, more congestion, more of the output that you're looking to mitigate. So I think it's just counterintuitive. I'd rather see them have a tax break of some sort or a fee reduction when they come for their permits, rather than more housing. That's just,
That could be effective as
Well,
well.
I'm just, like I said, following the
You, go ahead, Karen. you
Karen
can take-
Shoup, I am on the planning board.
It's soon to be on the council.
Okay. So I actually somewhat disagree, but I've only been on the planning board a year. And so I only recently learned of the Conservation Commission, and Randy Hogan was kind enough to forward me the state statute that creates it. And what kind of blew my mind was that the Conservation Commission is actually supposed to be directly involved with the planning board, involved in all of their planning. So when I think of that, I'm like, okay, so every time we get an agenda, maybe they take a peek, they have zero involvement. And I think that's the conversations Randy and I had recently, is they're not even been brought to the table, even though they're created by a state statute that literally says you are supposed to be directly involved with the planning board. So that's my 2 cents about the Conservation Commission, and where I think maybe we could get you more involved and you can maybe make an impact. I do think maybe there is room with the waivers that people ask through planning board, because I've only been on it a year, but I specifically can think of one property. The first time around, it was almost like they were getting ready to ask for a waiver, but we kind of, even though I'm not an environmentalist, I love the environment, but I don't know the details of development, I could sort of see that this wasn't best for the environment. And I think they changed it. To be honest, I missed the last meeting. But I think my thing is, I feel like Conservation Commission and sustainability could have a more active role in these developments, at least if they're sitting at the table. They're not even sitting at the table right now. And I think that's the difference to me. And I think they need to be sitting at the table. And I think maybe that's why they're so frustrated, is because I think they should be more involved in the whole process. And they have not been up to this point, and they didn't know where to direct their issues. Again, on planning board, I've received 0 memos for the whole year that I've been on there from the Conservation Commission. But yet when I met Randy Hogan recently, she definitely expressed some concerns about current development that's going on here, and specific concerns about the environmental impacts. And so I would love to correlate that a little more. So, you know, we're kind of operating under the state statute, bring them to the table. So you don't have a frustrated memo that's 3 pages long when things like this happen. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Go ahead.
I think that we're still stuck in the situation where the Conservation Commission was, I was on it, was really discouraged from getting involved with the downs. You know, there was a person influential on the committee who said, that's a planning issue, you know? Well, not just with that development, but lots of things, you know, we expressed interest in. So we were discouraged internally, and that person happened to be on the planning board as well. So that's kind of the context of how we didn't get, we haven't been present in your tenure, but we're very eager to put an end to that. And while I have the floor, I was an energy conservation contractor for 10 years down in Massachusetts, just before I moved here 30 years ago. And we did retrofits of, you know, but largely it was blowing insulation in the houses, hundreds of them. It was a very good business to be in at the time until Reagan killed it. But it was very clear that to us that building houses better, and we largely know how to do it then, you know, was the ticket, you know, because eventually we can we don't want to retrofit the ones that haven't been built yet. And in that 30 years, there's a whole bunch of them that have been built, and they're built better than the ones we were throwing insulation into, but not as well as they could be. And another thing I will say is that regarding the solar in the town, the solar ordinance is here, and there's trouble, there's controversy over trees and salvaging trees, not cutting trees in order to build up solar and the capacity. My daughter has for 20 years been a climate analyst and scientist at Union of Concerned Scientists, and we both have been in the climate issue together for all that time, actually since 1990. And it's really important to get the solar right. We have to do it because we have to stop the emissions. So solar is one way that we can do it, a big way that we can do it, but we don't have the land. And we know that from the meeting that we had the other night, we learned that there's very little land that is available to us to meet the Conservation Commission's goal of 30% conserved. And so the only way to achieve solar in that situation is to put it on roofs, and that requires, you know, solar orientation. And so even if a builder or a homeowner builder didn't want to put the solar on, at least the house could have solar orientation, so the next owner can do it. And just the house just being there with south-facing windows is such a blessing. You know, the people in 1622 knew that, and yet we hardly ever do it. You know, and it astonishes me. There's so little solar orientation right now.
I had a question of the big development that's going on. We'll pick on the Downs here for a minute. How many solar panels are going on rooftops in the Downs? And my guess is that you have some football field size spaces based upon how much commercial construction is going on in that district of the Downs. How many panels are going on rooftops there? I would wager Zed.
That's the case so
Nobody,
far.
we don't know.
Well, I think mainly Tubbs is got plans to put it on, and the new IDEX is got plans to put it on. But it's nowhere near the.
My point is, I think you're on the right track. You're asking the right questions. The meeting on Monday, that kind of led up to this one as well. There's a lot of good discussion, a lot of good concepts, but the groups are really just formalized in the past 6 months or 9 months, so you're barely organized, formally organized under your new leadership. So that's not an excuse. That's just, let's be fair about how far along you are. But I agree with you. You're not where you need to be. You need to be at a strategic level. You need to be helping us with defining specific things we can require developers. We're still trying to define, for our own purposes, community benefits that we're committed to in 2018 in a 30-year CEA, and we still have nothing other than proving a concept that was nowhere in any of that. And that has nothing to do with us as far as I'm concerned, as a town or a council to prove a concept for a developer. So we're like, forget about being on the right page. We're not even in the right, in the right building here for that. So we need to just accelerate this, and we need to start holding people accountable. We need to start doing that, and you need to start as a public helping us to do that, and screaming yell when we're not.
So the Sustainability Committee did meet with the Downs developers and talked through some of the things that we were encouraging them to consider. But again, we can't put it in town ordinance because it's a state building code, and they weren't asking for a waiver, so there wasn't something to trade for. And if you can tell us where in the ordinances we are allowed to put these things, that is not in conflict
You're
with
not
state
allowed
law.
anywhere, but you can make recommendations to us and we can adopt. We go through a public process to adopt it.
Right, but you can't either for the building code.
Well, the building code, you're correct. Our hands are tied.
And
a number
all
ways
of
as
these
well.
things that we're talking about are building code things. So there are
Unless
things
you
that we
get
can
creative.
incentivize,
Right.
and there are
So the
things
way around it is in the
and that we
ordinance.
can. What do you mean in the ordinance?
Because you can't enforce anything stricter than the MUBEC.
Right,
But
so
if you get it into an ordinance, then it's not part of the code, it's part of the town ordinance.
wait a minute.
So
Okay.
the code says you have to use 16 penny nails on your studs. We adopt by reference the code, but we also have local ordinances that can be more detailed or slightly different than those.
Really?
Yeah, so we might.
It brings
Why have I
kind of the
been told
home
I
rule
can't-
back,
We can't do this.
because the
for
home
10
rule
years.
is gone right now in terms of the building code.
But when they conflict with each other is when you start to get issues, because then it's really hard to enforce one over the other.
Right, and so we've been told again and again that we are not allowed as a community to pass ordinances that would be more strict than the building code.
I think it's challenging too. I would agree with that.
So in any case, we're doing the work of trying to meet with the developers to point out that the people living in these houses 5 years from now, 10 years from now will have specific needs. And that to do some of these things early is so much cheaper. And somehow well, I guess if we're doing the ordinance on EV chargers, How does
should be
that
mo-
fit
That
around
should
the
be
edges?
moving along, but
then how does that fit around the edges? Because that's. a
well, we
building
had thrown that
requirement.
into the memo because we knew that process was going forth. But we felt like, oh, it's a way to bargain right now because it's not in the ordinance. We can bargain when they're going for the waiver.
And with that one in particular, I think other states, they have implemented similar EV code by amending the international or whatever
The
IBC.
IECC.
I don't think Maine allows you to do that. So in Maine, we're looking at an ordinance approach as opposed to amending
Well,
the code.
that sounds new. Well, we have all kinds of ideas then for ordinances if we're allowed to do that. And again, we've been told we can't. So I ask the same questions over and over again. I do.
I mean, what I would encourage is like, do what you guys think is right, what needs to happen. Let us worry about how to make it work and the legal mechanisms and what needs to happen, but bring the ideas and some may be like easy to direct to ordinance, but I would hate to like let something get in the way that may be a barrier, but I always feel like there's a way to work around it. But I think like that's where we need you guys to kind of do what you've done. I mean, you've already done great work. I do feel though, like we're these are good ideas and we're scratching the surface, but I think the real question that I'm feeling like we're kind of discussing now is like, how do we, like we've talked about growth separately, we've talked about conservation separately, and they really should be going hand in hand in one conversation. So how do we make sure this continues to be at the forefront as we talk about growth and as we talk about new development, and just really make sure that this is intertwined in that conversation? I think that's something as we look at the GMO and amending the GMO, because you mentioned that example earlier about maybe it's not one that Nick would support, but like some sort of incentive for growth if you meet certain standards or do certain things. Like those are types of things I think we could put in even the growth ordinance to encourage it. So I mean, I think there's paths, and we need to work together to figure out what's the best path to get the best outcome, but also the path of least resistance that we're going to be able to be successful to make progress on.
And you have to remember that it's great for us to come up with all these ideas and say, this is awesome, and we're going to be, you know, making ordinances that are going to do this, but we also have to sell it to the public. And we represent, you know, 20-something thousand people. And I can tell you right now, you're going to get pushback on some of these ideas, which is fine. I mean, it's part of the whole process. But I have great hopes for the EV ordinance. I think that's a good start, but it takes a while to get things through, because it's more than just the idealistic, oh yeah, this is the way life should be, which I happen to believe in. But it may not be the way life should be for a lot of people because of cost, or do we want Scarborough again to be the most expensive place in the state for people to live, or whatever. So we need to keep all of that in mind. There's a balance here. There's a push and pull.
Pete Slavinski, I see you have your hand up online. I believe I've unmuted you. I tried to promote you, but I don't know that I have those credentials.
Yes, you have. Thank you, Councilor Cloutier. Thanks for members of the council. My name is Pete Slavinski. I'm a previous chair of the Conservation Commission and also a current member of the Conservation Commission. I wanted to jump back to a couple things that were stated. Councilor Cloutier, in response to your question about the transfer of development rights program, about 10 years or so ago, the Conservation Commission created a really nice document. It was a brochure about the TDR program in conjunction with the planning department, with work with Jay Chase, who was a planner at the time. And that was mailed out to dozens of property owners in, I guess, what was called the receiving area of Western Scarborough, but I don't think it was ever really shared with developers at the time. And I don't really know the status of that document right now. And it's no longer on our website, but it'd be really good to dig back up and see if we could find that, because it really was a nice brochure kind of outlining what the TDR program is, and maybe this would be an appropriate time to revisit that. And then in response to Karen's comments from the planning board, historically, the Conservation Commission, at least in my experience of being on the Conservation Commission since 2007, only commented on projects when specifically requested by the planning board. So for us to comment on something, we needed a specific request from the planning board to do so. And that stemmed back to a conflict of personal comments made versus Conservation Commission comments made related to a development prior to 2007. So there's a long history of that, but that we may want to revisit that in terms of if there's interest from the planning board, we really need a request from the planning board to comment on projects. And I just wanted to add one last thing related to the memo that we're discussing that's related to conservation. I know a lot of the focus of our discussion has been on energy and EV and stuff like that, so I don't want to sidetrack that, but maybe we can just place a bookmark for future conservation or for future conversation, sorry. You know, only about 15% of Scarborough is currently conserved. And if we wanted to reach a goal of 30%, which I know is a goal of the land trust and potentially a goal of the town itself based on past bonds that were voted on by the town, the town is consistently very heavily supportive of conservation of land in Scarborough. So if we want to reach that 30%, we need to conserve about 6,300 additional acres of land in the town. And, we need to really think about what the appropriate mechanism for doing that is. Do we tie it specifically to the GMO? Do we write new ordinances that relate to conservation of land? Do we work that into existing ordinances? I'm not sure of that mechanism at this point, but I just wanted to add that to the conversation. So I thank you for your time, and I'm done with my comments at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was great. I know we're nearing the end of our time. I think there's Kathleen Miller. Is she on the commission? Yeah. So we're
She's
going
not on the
to,
commission, but
oh,
she's
okay.
here. She's here.
Okay, I'm going to open it to public comment in just a minute then. I wanted to add one more thing that was in the memo about interconnected public trails, bike trails, which is also something that's within the Conservation Commission's charge, is to help us achieve that objective for that goal. And you may need funding for this, so I'm going to throw it out there. Maybe you can talk about it. We don't have any overarching plan about what that could look like, or about how we could get from the downs, because a lot of these parcels are already owned and developed, but if there was some sort of overriding plan or master plan about when opportunities come up, we would want to get this easement or this right of way, so that eventually we get to an interconnected trailway. I think that's worth pursuing. And I don't know that there's an easy way to get there. I'd be looking for help on that. Any other?
Lot to ask a volunteer team to do. That's a very big job.
Well, it may be that we need to hire an outside resource at your request. Maybe you can help facilitate or coordinate that. And that's why I thought there might be some funding requirement. But I think in terms of who owns or shepherds that process, it probably is the Conservation Commission.
Can you put that on your list? For conservation? I mean, I'm Sustainability Committee. I'm not Conservation. So
I had one question. Is there anything we should do as a council to follow up on the fact that you sent a memo that was not responded to? Is there any, other than us having a workshop and talking about approaches and what to do next time? Well, is there anything we should do as a council in terms of conveying to them our feelings about that and our expectations for the future?
So I'm open to suggestions, Don. That's why we're here talking.
So one suggestion I might have that might be actionable, right, is to maybe commit to next year partnering with both committees to help us establish one goal for next year for the council around conservation sustainability. Because again, there's many mechanisms or many things I think that were discussed tonight, even the last one that Peter brought up. If our goal as a town is to reach 30%, do we want to next year get to 5% and work together to figure out what are the things we're going to do that? Some of it may be encouraging some things around development. Some of it may be trying to acquire new land. I don't know what the answers are, but like maybe helping us get to a specific goal that we can all partner on next year. That might help us at least stay focused and have a continued check-in conversation to see how we're doing to that goal.
some of this feels like it overlaps with whatever the long-term planning process was that built the document, that several of these things are in the document. And so I'm, again, not sure how to press these things for the comprehensive plan. Yeah.
I mean, last night or Monday night at Conservation Commission, Transportation Committee also came up, as well as Long Range Planning Committee. And the fact that we're all bound by the comp plan, and just so many of these conversations have synergies, and, you know, talking about trail connectivity and, you know, making better pedestrian access, like that might be something that the Transportation Committee would tackle. But again, it's under the umbrella of this same goal of, you know, keeping conservation and sustainability at the forefront of the decision-making.
I've not been on transportation, but it's my understanding that transportation worked with council maybe 10 years ago to pass complete streets. And that's generally been waived when streets are being repaired for a variety of reasons, because that was the mechanism to get to.
There's a complete streets policy.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's not applied universally, it's applied selectively. based on the thing, we're just reviewing it.
Yeah. And I mean, certainly I've seen road work on Pleasant Hill Road that my kids still can't ride a bike to Higgins Beach because there's still nowhere to ride it safely. So, I mean, a lot of the mechanisms are there. A lot of people have worked really hard to push things. And I think part of what's missing is a mechanism for implementation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can't implement.
I think to implement though requires like, again, for the council to like be accountable to a specific goal that we work with the town manager, the committees to execute on. So again, I think part of the problem is maybe it hasn't been prioritized appropriately. And I think, you know, maybe we can find a way next year or as we go forward to kind of have a aligned goal that we're all working towards together, because it does cut, a lot of this does cut across other committees, even I feel like in the rec advisory
Rec
board and the-
advisory
and
was
the
there,
parks
or-
and
Todd was at the meeting on Monday too.
yeah, so again, there's a lot of things we're trying to do. We're all just kind of doing them in pockets, and I don't know how well we're talking to each other and then saying, what do we want to focus and prioritize across committees? Because there's a lot of synergies. And if we could all get a little bit more focused, I think we can actually make some progress. I think what I'm hearing frustration is like, we're not making progress. We have stuff. How can we make better progress?
Dramatic readings of the comprehensive plan at the start.
We're ready. We don't want to get bored. We're almost done with our EV ordinance. That solar ordinance. Give us something else to do.
So Chuck, I'm gonna let you close it and then we'll go to public comment.
That's what I want you to do. I move you go to public comment.
Okay, very good. So I know we had Kathleen Miller, I think had her hand up and are you still looking to speak, Kathleen?
Yeah, it went out.
Yes, I mean, I just thank you for your time. I didn't realize what the process was, but I wanted to just speak in support of having sustainability and conservation commission members at the table in, you know, these major conversations around growth, because I feel like the piece around conservation of land is so important to what we as a town need to consider to be sustainable in any way, and to maintain quality of life as things change with the climate. So I'm hopeful to see this conversation, and I appreciate hearing the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. Ken Johnson just texted me. He's trying to get in and he can't get in.
Okay, very good. We'll let him in. Peter, do you still have your hand up? Or are you all set?
All set. Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. And I keep seeing Nina and then you go away. Nina McKee. Okay. Okay, Nina, you should be able to speak now.
Oh, good. It's Nina McKee, and I'm from 309 Black Point Road, and I would love to be there in person, but I have COVID like raging. So I've been very frustrated because I really want to have some input into those 4 items that was on the agenda for tonight. So I know you don't have much time, so I'll try to be really quick. The number 1, the Passer House building guidelines might be really great to look at, in reducing energy consumption 40 to 60%. But my question is, can the town ordinance enforce Passer House specific designs for developers when the cost is more than the regular building? And I just hope that the council can study and amend the ordinance to reflect positive energy saving requirements that developers would be required to follow. And I would suggest that the committees come up with specifics and then go to the council and discuss it. Number 2, the electrical vehicle charging stations, I think, are absolutely no brainers. And it seems like that's well in hand. And as far as the contiguous space, it's also a no-brainer. And I think every developer with large acreage should give 30% land to the conservation and connect with other conserved lands when possible. And that should really be mandated. And then the fourth one, the Eastern Trail connection, seems like it may be too late to get the Downs to commit to the trail when they have already given some money, some land to the Warren Woods project. But I have one more thing to add to the memo, and that is I really would love to see a ban for the use of all pesticides on all Scarborough properties. And that means no tree spraying, no grass spraying, no bug spraying. And as we all know, pesticides kill bees, butterflies, insects, birds, et cetera, that are vital to nature's life chain. And they are also harmful to animals, which includes us. So South Portland has banned all pesticides, and I just hope Scarborough will consider to do the same at some point. So anyway, thank you so much for this really good discussion. And I think it's going to come out really, really great in the future. So it's really encouraging that the town is having conversations about saving and enhancing our environment. But now the challenge is to do something substantial towards achieving our most really urgent environmental goals. So I just commend everyone for this conversation, and let's just hope that it continues and resolves into some really good situations for our future building and our future environment. So thank you, and I'm glad I'm not there to give you this hideous COVID.
Well, I hope
Thank
you
you.
recover soon. Thank you, Nina. With that, I'm going to close this workshop. Thank you all for joining us. I think it was actually a productive discussion. A lot of, I think, interesting ideas, and I look forward to more frequent interactions. By the way, this is, I think, the second or third time we've gotten together this year, which is probably unprecedented.
Sends a good signal to the committee that we have ears.
We do.
And it's
We
that
hear you. This stuff is hard, but we're trying to figure it out. I can commit to that. So, why don't we take a 5-minute recess and we'll begin our regular meeting after that. I have to wait for the video, don't I? Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, October 19th, and this is the regular meeting of the Scarborough Town Council. I'll call this meeting to order, and if you'll all rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United
United States of America, the Republic stands under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes. Thank you. We do have a few members participating remotely, so we'll be on roll call for this evening. And Tony, would you help me with the roll call, please?
Counselor Seither,
Here.
Counselor Anderson,
Here.
Counselor Hamel,
Here.
Counselor Katarina,
Here,
he is present.
Yeah.
Counselor McGee
Here.
and Chairman Clucci,
Here.
all present. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Item 4 is general public comments. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to something that is not on the agenda this evening? If it's not on the agenda, please feel free to come up, state your name and address, and then you can speak for 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Kelly. I live at the Oaks in Scarborough. And I just want to thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. And again, I am talking about the election of 2022, a crucial day for our country. And I've been speaking with a lot of people, and it seems as we get closer to the election, a lot of people are really on edge. And they're pretty upset. And there is a lot of issues that we're dealing with locally and nationally. And I just honestly feel that we need to really pay attention to this election and give it our time and hopefully make the right decisions. So we do have a lot of issues to think about. The illegal border crossings, we all know. We have high energy prices. And if you live in Maine, I think you are on edge right now about how you're going to pay your fuel bill. Then you got high food prices on top of your high fuel bill. So what are we doing? How are we going to handle that on a family budget? We have nationally a lot of drugs and crimes in a lot of our large cities. And it seems like a lot of these cities with the high crime and drugs want to lower their police budgets while they're in the midst of chaos. So we have electric cars, and I think that in the state of Maine, there are a few people out there that have the electric cars, and they're having issues already. Last winter, they noticed that the batteries do not handle well in cold weather. So it doesn't seem like the idea of electric cars isn't planned out very well for at least the state of Maine. And then you've got the cost of a new battery is over $20,000. We have school boards across the country, people in education positions right now that are pushing some very bad stuff on our kids. Parents really need to step up, even if it isn't your kid, stand up for all of them. Kids are defenseless and being taken advantage of. Then we have the labor shortage. Everyone I talked to over the past year is wondering, where are all the workers? Everybody I talk to, nobody seems to know. And it's the same thing. Where is everyone? What is going on? Nobody seems to know. I mean, is there, are people getting like financial aid, or is there some kind of relief or some kind of monthly check that people are getting that we just don't know about? I mean, I've talked to so many people over the past year and a half. It's a big mystery. So when you think about everything, does anything make sense? There's people in our government that want to shut this country down. They are not satisfied with this land of freedom, the rights that we all have as citizens to live free and pursue our happiness. They violate our US Constitution at every turn and violate their oath of office over and over again. Our elected officials seem to forget we voted for them to work for us. We, the people, should have the power over them, but it is working the other way around. They are telling us what to do, and we are complying. The compliance we gave them during COVID and getting the vaccine was all wrong. our government and the agencies that went along and
Ma'am, I just
enforced
wanted to,
mandates.
Note that you've run over time, so.
Okay, all right. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to
Thank
speak.
you for coming. Next is any adjustments to the agenda, item 6. Does anybody have any adjustments they'd like to? Finally, yes, okay. Excuse me. Thank you, Tony. Item 5 is minutes from our September 21st, 2022 and October 5th, 2022 town council meetings. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, would you call the roll, please?
Counselor McGee,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Katerina,
Yes.
Father,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Clucci.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6 is adjustments to the agenda. Seeing none, I signed the treasurer's warrants prior to this evening's meeting. And item 8 is the town manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to start off this evening, and it's actually noted on the agenda, just giving an update on the Comfort Inn situation to remind the council. I don't think you need a reminder, but really for the public, the council really finally took action regarding the innkeeper's license for the Comfort Inn on September 21st. That approval had 4 different conditions, and that 4th condition was added that very night. That condition really required the innkeeper to follow a transition plan that they put forward. And it also tasked me with providing periodic reports between now and the end point, which is the end of this calendar year. So I'd like to report on the progress of the transition plan and also kind of the status, if you will, of the various license conditions. With respect to the transition plan, the proposal was to have 3 different waves of eviction notices, to the point of which is to observe and respect a court process and a legal process that needs to be followed. I can report, and we verified that the first wave of those notices have gone out, and actually the second went out earlier this week, yesterday and today. In terms of progress on the plan, they are certainly in compliance at this point. With regard to the license conditions, and to remind the public, essentially they were to require some on-site provision of social service support for the residents at the facility, and also provide for security. In the packet, you'll see quite a detailed overview of calls for service. Those calls persist. I'd like to say they've moderated slightly, but they really haven't. They're kind of right status quo, if you will. Still challenging our public safety departments. To their credit, I think they've kind of fallen into a bit of a cadence. Not that it's comfortable, but we're doing our best to manage it. And luckily, it's not going up. We've also been advised through the Opportunity Alliance that at this point, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is the federal funding that is supporting this activity, there are no payments at this point will not extend beyond the 31st of this month. I am aware that there are active efforts to seek an extension of those funds, and I can't really comment on the prospect of that extension, but I suspect it will be likely to be extended. As an aside, Opportunity Alliance, being the agency tasked in Cumberland County for finding housing for these folks, have floated some ideas, or at least inquired the town's receptivity with extending the current use sometime into the spring. And we've been quite clear, and the council's action was definitive. And at this point, there's no ongoing conversation in that regard. They do, Opportunity Alliance, that is, continue to have 2 social service providers on site during kind of normal working hours. With respect to the security program, with the prospect of that funding potentially going away, I'm aware that the Innkeeper is looking at other options. They profess to remain committed to ensuring the safety of their residents. And they've not made any final decisions on the existing contract that they have in place with Polaris Security. But I suspect that's going to be an ongoing conversation over the coming weeks. And when I report next, I'll certainly key on that point. The final piece I'd note is, this whole program is trust but verify. So we have been doing on-site inspections. The fire chief and his deputy were on site yesterday, did an inspection of the facility. He does report that there were some fairly poor conditions, really kind of health and sanitation related. That's a cause for some concern. I've had a brief discussion with him. He's inclined to bring in some additional state resources that perhaps have more authority in that arena than we do. So again, that's something that we'll look to focus on intently over the next several weeks, and I certainly expect to report back to you. There also were 3 fire code violations noticed that were corrected before they left the premises. So, you know, the situation, I think we all appreciate, is what it is. It's certainly not getting better. I have some fear that it's actually degrading a bit. I'm hopeful that if there's some certainty around the funding, that we can get back to a level of status quo. So I think the council was wise to require, I think it would have anyway, but to require periodic reports. There'll be 3 other reports before the end of the year. And at that point, if they've not complied with the transition plan, I'm tasked to recommend either suspension or revocation hearing for the license. So we're doing our very best to avoid either of those scenarios, but it's not entirely up to us, obviously. Perhaps I'll just stop there and see if there are any questions with respect to that report. Okay. Beyond that, I just have a couple of quick things. As regards the Cliff Walk, I have directly communicated with the Prouds Neck Improvement Association that the town's clear expectation is that the pathway be reopened to the public, and they've acknowledged that and agreed that that's their intention. Having said that, they've not done so yet. They indicated just today that they expect to respond by the end of this week. So I continue to monitor it closely. Perhaps the council needs as a group to convene and have some discussions around the matter. That's where it stands. In addition, I want to make you aware of the first annual junior firefighter muster. Scarborough Fire and Police both have youth programs called the Explorer programs. These are designed to get young folks involved in public safety and ideally make it a career. And we've had some success in that regard. And another number of other departments have similar programs. Captain Darren Granada of Scarborough Fire has taken upon himself to help coordinate this first annual muster. And a muster is essentially an exercise where firefighters are able to show their skills with hoses and ladders and such. So it's meant to be a kind of a fun opportunity. And this will occur on Sunday, October 30th at 10 a.m. right here at our public safety building. We have about 52 participants. They'll be supported by 30 volunteers. And it really is intended to provide some exposure to public safety and hopefully get some recruitment out of that. So very pleased with Darren's initiative in this regard. And lastly, I would certainly be remiss not to mention the passing of Colette Matheson, my longtime executive assistant. I'm going to keep my comments brief just because I'm still pretty raw to me. Colette would have been 72 next month. She was with the town for 33 years in 3 different capacities. Just a delightful person. There will be a ceremony at Pate Funeral Home on Monday, October 24th, 4 to 6. I would like to close town hall slightly early that day to encourage and allow staff to attend. And I've been asked to speak there. Hopefully by then will have collected my thoughts and emotions. So thank you.
Thank you. If we could all just absorb a moment of silence for Colette. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Order number 22-097 is a 7 p.m. public hearing on the proposed amendments to Chapter 1401, the Coastal Waters and Harbor Ordinance. Work was put forth by the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee, worked through ordinance. We had a first reading on it at our last meeting and are here for a public hearing. I do feel like it's worthy of some introduction.
Yes.
And there are some pending proposed changes
Yes.
that we adopted. Second reading, you want to go ahead?
I'd be happy to handle that. Thanks. We had promised at the first reading to make Darren Granada available to help field questions. Unfortunately, he has a conflict this evening, but we will be having, two other steps in our process of review for this ordinance, and one will be going to the ordinance committee again on Thursday, October 27th, is a week from tomorrow. And then if all goes well, would come back to the council for the second reading and final vote in early November. So this is the result of several months of revision to the coastal waters ordinance. Both of our waterfront committees have updated ordinances, so shellfish ordinance will be sort of on the heels of this one in the next couple of months. These amendments proposed include a number of changes, additional wording to reflect expanding uses and use by residents and visitors. We also wanted to have the ability to ensure uniform enforcement of the ordinance. So that's why there's another piece that's being added that would be voted on and submitted formally at the second reading and vote. There was some terminology and definitions that needed to be edited. For example, we needed a definition of houseboats, and there were other things that we added to reflect the changes in the harbor. The other major change is that there has been a big update of the moorings in the harbor, and they've used GIS mapping and GPS technology to try to get a better location of the field. Some of the moorings had been lost because of dredging, and prior to that, the movement of the sand, into the waterway. So additionally, we're expecting some necessary improvements that will be coming forward to the pier, as well as equipment that's been on the pier for some time. So we really wanted to improve the operation and maintenance of the pier facility, as well as the moorings field, including the parking areas and ramps. So that's part of the reason for why there has been enforcement language that is being offered as well. The final point is we are committed, but have not completed yet a final legal review. But in drafting the enforcement provisions, Darren has relied on ordinances in nearby towns, as well as drawn from the MSRA Title 38 provisions at a state level governing this. So we feel that we've kind of done the belts and braces on this, and I'm happy to field any questions at this time, but otherwise would look forward to us moving to the next step on this.
Any questions for Don? Yeah, just to reiterate, so there in the packet, there's a proposed amendment that we adopted second reading. Don is suggesting that he's going to vet that further at ordinance next week, and then come back to us with any suggested changes that may be needed at second reading. With that, are there any members of the public that are here to speak to this item during the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing, and this will be before us at our next meeting for a second reading. Thank you. Order number 22-101 is the 7 p.m. public hearing and action on the renewal request for junkyard permits pursuant to Title 30A MRSA Chapter 183. Goldstein Steel Company Incorporated, located at 36 Running Hill Road. A Gagnon or E. Peary Iron and Metal, located at Rigby Road. I can't say that. Speedway Auto, located at 343 Payne Road, and SBR New England LP, doing business as Scarborough Recycling, located at 40 Holmes Road. Tony, would you help us to introduce this?
Yes, this is an annual renewal. In your packet, you had received a memo from myself and also one from the zoning administrator indicating that we had one location that was in non-compliance. However, that has since been taken care of. We also had an abutter that had written to the chair indicating that there had been issues. We did receive a letter on the 17th, and I believe it was forwarded to the council from Chairman Clucci, indicating that the owner had taken care of the issue. He is present this evening, and Mr. Copers is present if you have any questions, and he doesn't have any issues with the license being approved.
Very good. Thank you. Are there any questions on this? Okay, this is a public hearing. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak to this item? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing, and this is before us for action, so can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, and with that, Tony, would you call the roll, please?
Council McGee,
Yes.
Council Johnson,
Yes.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Yes.
Council Anderson,
Yes.
Council Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Clucci.
Yes,
That's unanimous. Thank you.
thank you. Next is proclamation, which I don't get to say this very often, 22-005. Act on the request for a proclamation declaring the month of October as Dysautomia Awareness Month. This I'm bringing forward at the request of several of our constituents, and I believe they're with us in the audience today. I believe that we have somebody who can introduce this topic much more eloquently than I can. Molly, would you mind coming up and help us understand what we're raising awareness of? You can come right up to the podium.
Hi, everyone. My name is Molly Ammon, and I want to thank all of you for being here today and listening to my story. So I want to share with you why this proclamation is important to me and why it's important that I raise awareness for dysautonomia. So if you were to just look at me, you would think I was a normal, healthy 22-year-old girl who had her life together, somewhat. So I just graduated from college in May, and I'm now working as a nurse in New Hampshire. I have an invisible illness called dysautonomia, which means I have a dysfunction of my autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system is responsible for everything your body does automatically, such as heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, temperature regulation, and pain sensation. For me, this means that I have daily headaches, dizziness, fatigue, GI issues, nausea, migraines, neuropathy, as well as temperature sensitivity. At the age of 13, I got sick with a virus that never resolved, and I became bedridden my 8th grade year. I had constant headaches and fatigue and was being bounced around from doctor to doctor. Over a year and a half later, I was diagnosed with POTS, which stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. This means that when I change from position from sitting to standing, my heart rate and blood pressure react. This leads me to feel dizzy and occasionally pass out. POTS is a form of dysautonomia. This was my freshman year, and although we had a diagnosis, this didn't come without struggles. We had to figure out a treatment, which included adjusting different medications, and I missed a total of 12 weeks of high school that year. My sophomore year, my symptoms continued to progress, and almost a year after being diagnosed with POTS, I got in to see a neurologist who suspected I had autoimmune dysautonomia. He soon started me on IVIG, which began my long journey with hospitalizations. Throughout high school and college, I was going into the hospital for 2 to 3 nights every month. I was in the hospital around holidays and even celebrated birthdays in the hospital. While the IVIG treatment helped, it didn't come without side effects. So this past year, my treatment plan needed to be adjusted. So I'm currently doing home infusions multiple times a week. So this is my story, which all leads me today. Why does awareness need to be raised for dysautonomia? First of all, it took me almost 3 years to get a diagnosis and get a treatment plan. And during that time, I was bedridden and unable to function as a normal teenager should. I saw 12 doctors during that time, and no one knew what was going on. By raising awareness today, I hope that no one else has to suffer as long as I did before getting answers. Additionally, I know that in sharing my story, it may help others who are in a similar situation. And lastly, if I advocate on behalf of Dysautonomia International, perhaps more research will be done that can find a cure to help me and other patients in the future. Again, thank you all for listening today. Thank you to the board for organizing this proclamation, and thank you for my parents for always supporting me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Much better than I could have done. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak? Okay.
Yeah, there are other supporters here and other people from the support group, but I don't know if else.
Thank you so much for coming, everybody. With that, we do have this on the agenda for action. Tony, would you help me? Actually, could I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Would you call the roll, please?
Council McGee,
Yes.
Council Johnson,
Yes.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Council Seidler,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
and Chairman Clucci.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, moving on to old business, there is none, and new business, there is none. So we are jumping ahead to standing committee and special standing and special committee reports, liaison reports, and council member comments. So if you have something to add as a counselor, please raise your hand and we'll wrap things up. Counselor Anderson.
Yeah, just a reminder, tomorrow night at the Public Safety Building at 6 o'clock is our next Counselor Corner Live on traffic and transportation. So if you can attend physically or virtually to participate, or people watching tonight, if you want to come and talk to the council about concerns or opportunities you see in this area, you know, we're happy to listen.
It's always fun and exciting. Sometimes they provide popcorn too.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other counselor comments or something to add? Counselor Hamel.
Thank you. I had an update for the ordinance committee. We'll meet next Thursday at 4 p.m. here. And the agenda items include, we'll be revisiting the coastal waters ordinance proposal, which I mentioned previously. We'll also be taking a look at the shellfish conservation ordinance revisions. We'll revisit charging stations, EV charging stations, which we spoke about earlier. And there are several planning related things that are coming forward to the ordinance committee following long range planning committee review. And that includes site plan review, applicability for unified ownership, and potentially posting for no large trucks on Two Rod Road, revision to chapter 601 traffic ordinance. And that's about it. Yeah. So a few things to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Anybody else?
Me?
Counselor Katarina.
Yeah, this is just a counselor comment. I want to express my deepest sympathy to Jim Matheson, and I was very sad to hear about Colette. I've worked with Colette very closely since I was first elected in 2013, and my daughter worked in the clerk's office. I think it was 1 year, I can't remember, but anyways, when she was in college. And Colette and Tody were awesome to her. And when I told Katarina about Colette's passing, she was very upset. So, and wanted me to express my sympathy to everybody. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, I guess I want to add a little bit there as well for the public. I mean, the people who work for your town are really like family. They have a bond that spans decades in many cases, and so they get to know each other's inside and out. So this is a huge loss to the town of Scarborough, and just please be patient with everybody as we grieve and move on. So, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please. And we are adjourned. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.